Can we predict a criminal before they ever actually commit a crime? It's a heavy question, right? In this explainer, we're going to do a step-by-step evaluation of the scientific and historical evidence. We'll be looking at everything from early attempts at face reading all the way to modern DNA sequencing, just to see what the data actually tells us.
All right, Section 1, the origins of criminality. Now, before the late 19th century, criminal behavior was largely seen as a philosophical or even religious issue, until researchers finally started systematically looking for biological causes.
Which brings us to Section 2, faces and body types.
So, back in 1876, a researcher named Cesare Lombroso put forward this theory called Atavism. He basically took physical measurements of living prisoners and the skulls of dead criminals, and he proposed that criminals were actually less evolved than non-criminals. He called them evolutionary throwbacks, arguing that this biological state literally made them impulsive and unable to control their basic urges. Now, we're definitely putting on our myth-busting hats today, because while Lombroso gets a lot of credit as the father of criminology for attempting a scientific approach, his biological conclusions were, well, deeply flawed.
Just look at the highly specific facial characteristics Lombroso was measuring here. He actually argued that murderers had beak-like aquiline noses, and con artists had thin, straight lips. I mean, that sounds more like a cartoon villain than actual science, right? The massive scientific red flag here is that Lombroso completely neglected to compare his criminal sample to a control group of non-criminals. Plus, in his sheer eagerness to prove his theory, there was likely some massive investigator bias going on. Later research looking at thousands of prisoners completely failed to replicate his findings. Now, fast forward to William Sheldon's 1940s somatotypes. He categorized human bodies into three main types. You've got the endomorph, who is soft and round with a pretty relaxed personality. Then the ectomorph, who's thin and fragile with a restrained personality. And finally, the mesomorph, who is muscular and hard. Sheldon argued that the brave, adventurous, and aggressive mesomorph was statistically the most drawn to crime. And interestingly, his research did actually find a higher percentage of mesomorphs in delinquent populations.
But hold on a second, we really have to pause here and ask that golden scientific question about correlation versus causation. Does having physical muscle actually cause a person to commit a crime? Or does a criminal lifestyle, say, needing to evade the police or literally fight for dominance, cause you to build that muscle mass? We also have to factor in things like higher testosterone, which is linked to both muscle growth and aggression. And then there's the labeling effect. If a large muscular kid is constantly labeled a troublemaker early on by teachers or peers, well, it might just become a tragic self-fulfilling prophecy.
All right, moving on to Section 3. Is crime in our DNA?
So, modern criminology has thankfully largely left the whole face and body measuring thing behind, looking instead at genetics and family studies. For example, Osborne and West found that 13% of sons with non-criminal fathers had criminal records, but that jumped to 20% if the father had a record. But even more compelling is Ishikawa and Raine's 2002 meta-analysis on twins. Now, identical twins share 100% of their genes, right? While non-identical twins share about 50%. The data shows a massive 44% concordance rate for criminality in identical twins. That means if one twin has a record, there's a 44% chance the other does too. Compare that to just 21.6% for non-identical twins. That huge jump strongly suggests there's some kind of genetic link to criminal behavior. But, and this is a big but, we gotta maintain our scientific rigor. We can't just assign pure biological causation here because of what's called the shared environment flaw. Yes, fathers and sons share genes, absolutely, but they also share homes, neighborhoods, education levels, and economic statuses. It is incredibly difficult to isolate biology when poverty or growing up in a tough neighborhood might be the actual driving force behind the behavior. To get around this, let's look at Mednick's 1987 adoption study. This builds a much clearer picture. This was a massive study of over 14,000 adoptees, and it brilliantly separates nature from nurture. Check this out. If neither set of parents had a record, the son's crime rate was 13.5%. If only the adoptive parents had a record, meaning pure environment, it was 14.7%. But if only the biological parents had a record, meaning pure genetics, it jumped to 20%. And if both had a record, it peaked at 24.5%. This really proves that while the environment matters, your genetic history plays a very distinct, measurable role. With that established, modern genetic researchers have been hunting for the specific culprits. Studies have suggested links between one variant of the 5-HT-TLPR gene and violent behavior, and another gene called NOS1 has been linked to impulsivity.
But to be totally impartial here, genetics absolutely cannot provide a full explanation. Think about it. If crime was purely genetic, identical twins would have a 100% concordance rate, not 44%. Human behavior is undeniably the result of highly complex interactions among a huge number of genes, definitely not just one or two bad seeds.
Let's transition to Section 4, the criminal personality type. So Hans Eysenck's 1970 theory attempts to bridge the gap between our physical biology and our learned behavior. Eysenck basically argued that criminals inherit a specific type of nervous system that makes them highly resistant to conditioning. According to him, the criminal personality scores high in 3 key areas. First up, extroversion. They have an under-aroused nervous system, making them outgoing thrill seekers who are constantly looking for risks just to stimulate themselves. Second, neuroticism. They are highly anxious and emotionally unstable. And third, psychopathicism. They are cold, aggressive, and hostile. Eysenck believed that because of this inherited nervous system, these individuals fail to learn society's rules because they quite literally do not respond to punishment the way a typical nervous system does.
But once again, we really have to challenge this theory with a question of cause and effect. It is absolutely true that studies have found higher rates of neuroticism and psychoticism in prison populations. But we have to ask ourselves, does this inherited nervous system dictate the criminal personality, or does suffering in a highly stressful, anxious, and legitimately dangerous prison environment cause a person to become highly neurotic and hostile? Measuring the personalities of people who are already locked in cages might be giving us a severely skewed result.
Stay curious and keep questioning the world around you.